welcome to another tutorial video. Today's one is doing the age-old technique of turning your dies into stamps using some funky foam, and I thought I'd show you this idea. I have done this before, but I don't think I did it in a video. I think it could have been a magazine commission or something that I did it for, but actually creating layered stamps from your dies, so you've actually got like almost like a block of stamps that you can just stamp to create a whole background, and then you have like different layers that you could put on top of it to fill in other areas and do different colours of heat embossing. And we're also playing with loads of different heat embossing colours. I'm going with all Nuvo colours just because I didn't have any reds in my Cosmic Shimmer collection, so I thought I'd go with all Nuvo colours for this. And we're going with copper, pink and red for the poinsettias, and then kind of like a aqua and a sort of pine or emeraldy sort of green colour for the foliage in the background as well. And the dies that I'm using are the gorgeous Sue Wilson ones. I've just picked out all the ones that I've used here. I used a couple of the poinsettias from the Festive Poinsettia trio, and then a few of the foliage pieces from the Festive Foliage, and then also this gorgeous die which says Christmas Greetings. I think all three of these sets were from her June collection from 2022, so they will all be linked below if you want to get hold of any of them. But I thought they'd work perfectly for this kind of technique. And so to do this technique, I have already made the stamps, obviously, to be able to make this card to show it to you. But if you do want me to do a full kind of tutorial on how to actually create your background stamps rather than just using them, then do let me know in the comments, and I could do that later on, like next year or something, as a video. But what I have done is I've got both of my stamps that I have created here, and I've just taped them onto acrylic blocks. But you could, the reason why I've created the stamps onto acetate is so that you could use them in your stamping platform and just tape them into your stamping platform, and then because they are acetate you can kind of see where you're stamping and stuff, which I think is always a good thing. So what I did was I got two pieces of acetate and I cut them down to slightly bigger than my favourite kind of sized card, and I made sure they were both the same size. Then I took one piece of the acetate and I cut 5 poinsettias, because I know when I do a background I like to have about 5 or 7 kind of items across my background. So I cut 2 large poinsettias, which is actually the medium size, and 3 of the smallest poinsettias from funky foam. This is just white funky foam, but any funky foam that you have will work. And it die cuts really easily, although one top tip is don't pass your plates through your machine and back again when you're die cutting funky foam, because you might get that double cutting where you'll mess up some of the details that are in there. You just want to go through once in one direction, otherwise the die could shift or the foam could have been squashed in a weird position, and then if you run it back through you'll get that double cutting. So always just run funky foam through in one direction. So that is how I've created the first stamp, which is where all the poinsettias are going. Then I took that same piece, or the second piece of acetate that's the same size as the first one, and I laid that piece of acetate straight over the top. And then I took the foliage pieces and placed them where I thought the background needed filling in, and I also just hand cut a few little circles there as well. If you had a hole punch that had a big enough mouth to fit your funky foam in, you could use a little hole punch, but mine wouldn't fit in there, so I just hand cut a few little circles there. And then to make sure when you're stamping that you know which way up your stamps are supposed to be, I've got a little arrow here that I drew on with Sharpie onto the acetate, and then over here I've also got one. So that just shows which way is up, which way I intended it to be up. You could flip it the other way for a different effect, but you're going to get more overlap because you actually designed the stamp to work this way and fill in the gaps. But you definitely could switch them around and stuff as well if you want to. But I just thought this is such a lovely idea for Christmas cards in particular, because this poinsettia design from Sue Wilson is so beautiful, and the way this has come out as well would be really lovely for batch making your Christmas cards. But I don't know about you, but who would actually want to sit there and have to die cut 5 poinsettias and like what 10 pieces of foliage for each card plus the sentiment as well, to actually do this with your die cuts? Whereas if you do this way, you're cutting 5 poinsettias, 10 bits of foliage, And then you've got your stamps, and you can just stamp it as many times as you want. You can use coloured inks, you can do your heat embossing. I might even take these stamps and in another one of my advent videos show you them on the jelly plate as well, because I think that will be a really good idea. It just depends if I get round to doing it. But if I don't do it for this, when I do the other video, I'll show them on the jelly plate. But yeah, I think it'll be really, really fun to kind of play with this design, and you don't have to be wary of what you're using on your stamps either, because you've made them yourself. So you could go to town with acrylic paint and flake and glitter glue and all that kind of stuff that normally you might be a little bit skeptical about using on your stamps because you don't want to accidentally ruin them. Not that they would, but you know you have that thing in your head, don't you, that you don't want to accidentally ruin something. But if you've made it from funky foam, you can recreate this if you do mess it up for whatever reason. So that is the sort of double layered stamp that we're going to use to create this. Definitely, if you wanted to, you could just do what I used to do in a lot of my sped up videos. I would just cut one element from the funky foam, and then I would stick it to an acrylic block, a smaller acrylic block that would fit it, usually just with some removable adhesive or a glue stick or something. Just stick it to the actual block and then stamp it multiple times. But if you are doing Christmas cards, you tend to want to kind of batch make, or at least make a few of the same design, so you're building up your stash of Christmas cards quicker. So I thought this was a much better way of kind of showing you how to do it, actually creating some large background stamps. And if you are using it in your stamping platform, it'll make it super duper easy, because you can just butt the card up into the same position each time rather than sort of looking through and lining things up. But the good thing about foam stamps as well, creating your own foam stamps, is they tend to stamp really nicely with all sorts of inks. In my sped up videos in the past, like literally years ago, probably like 5 years ago, when I used to do a lot of magazine freebie kind of videos, I would die cut the freebie dies from foam and use them with distress inks to do stamping in the background, and it worked perfectly. So it's a nice way of using your distress inks for your stamping as well. So I'm going to do another heat emboss card exactly the same as this to show you how I've mixed my powders, and then because I'm not showing you how to make the stamp and the video is probably going to be a little bit shorter, I was trying to keep them all short, but they tend to be going over the half-an-hour mark. But because I've got the stamps here, I might as well show you how nicely they stamp with some coloured ink as well, so we'll do that too. So first of all, we're going to need a piece of cardstock to work on. So I've got my piece of card here. I'm just going to add my anti-static powder onto here because we're heat embossing, and then dust it off. Then I'm going to take the poinsettias first, because I feel like it gets your whole sort of placement down if you get those poinsettias on first. So I've got them here, and we're going to get VersaMark ink pad and ink this up nicely. Also, the good thing about foam is it kind of holds on to the inks nicely. So as with distress inks, it will stamp them nicely. It also holds your sticky inks nicely for you as well. So then all we need to do is just place that over the top and just stamp it as if it was a normal stamp. And just press down all over to get a good contact between your stamp and your cardstock. And then we're going to do some embossing powder, like mixing, and then we'll actually end up with our own custom mix at the end as well, which I've been keeping in a little bag. So I'm going to get a bit of scrap paper. Then for the colours, I'm going with the Copper Mine from Tonic, which is a beautiful copper with loads of gorgeous glitter in there. Then I'm also going with Strawberry Slush, which is an opaque pink. You can kind of see little flecks of white in there, which means it's an opaque colour. Then I'm also going to use where's the colour name on this one? Sportscar Red, which is a beautiful bright red. And then also Sugared Strawberries, which is a sparkly red. You definitely don't have to use all of these different colours. I just have all of them in my stash, so I thought it's quite a nice way of showing you how you can use them. On my original card, I was trying to be specific with where I put the copper. I got this one spot on, but then I realised, hang on, if I'm tipping this in the light to see where the poinsettia is, it's going to tip the copper all down the rest of the card while I'm trying to place it. So I just gave up in the end, and I just sort of did a little splattering of copper roughly where I thought the middle of the poinsettias were or just so roughly, so there's like one splattering of copper on each poinsettia, but we are going to use more copper later on to tie that colour in. So that's a little bit of copper. Then actually with the other colours, I was just tipping them straight from the pot. You can be controlled enough. If you want extra control, use your little metal Nuvo spoon. But if you have the control of just like tapping your pot, you can get away with tapping it directly from the pot as well. And you can either go really speckly colour, or you can go slightly more concentrated. The last one I did very speckly, so this one, let's go slightly more like concentrated areas so you can really see the difference. And we'll see what that looks like at the end. And don't worry about mixing all of these powders, because I've been saving it in a little bag here, so we could then use this on another project or to do another one of these if we wanted to as well. Then we're going to go in with the Sportscar, and again we're going to try and like concentrate the colour in some areas rather than doing it so speckly like I did the first one. Maybe a little bit over here. And then we'll go in with the glittery red as well, and shake glittery ones so that they have a nice distribution of the glitter and the embossing powder. Okay, then you might be thinking, how do you know that you've covered everything? Well, at this point you don't really know that you've covered it, so you can kind of, if you start shaking the card, you can kind of see your images appear. And then you can just sort of tip the powder around to cover any of the areas that you sort of missed as you were tapping your powder onto there. And then don't worry that we've still missed some areas, because you can tap the excess off, and then you can lift this back up, tip all of this back onto here, and just use it to finish off those areas as well. Get that side there. I'll do that side first and then do it again. But it's really easy to sort of have your own lovely mix of different colours. And hopefully this one will be able to see a little bit more solidness of the variation between the colours as well. Okay, so that is our beautiful poinsettias. Really, really pretty. Then, with all of our leftovers, we can put them into our little, don't touch that because I'm going to knock the powder off, and I think I already have knocked some of the powder off. Okay, that'll do. So put that out of the way so you don't knock the powder off. Then you can take your little bag with your excess colours in, and then just make like a little funnel on the paper, and keep that in your bag for your next card. Or for any other Christmas cards you're doing where you want some kind of sparkly red mixture, you'll have a beautiful custom red colour there that you can definitely get at least another project out of, and that's from doing 2 of these speckled sort of ones. Then we can tap off the excess and use the other side of the paper to do the green in a second. But first of all, we need to heat our red and copper powders. There we've got our beautiful variegated poinsettias. You can see how it goes from that bright pink to the bright red, and then it's got the sparkle of the copper and the sparkly red in there as well. And it's a little bit different looking from this one, where I went a little bit more like overall speckly kind of colours. You can see there's more like differentiation between the pink areas and the red areas of the poinsettia, but really, really pretty. It looks so lovely. I really enjoy making my own stamps out of die cuts, because you really can be really experimental and get some unique results with your cards as well. So that is the actual poinsettias. Then we need to do the foliage, and I think that is the right way up. Yes, it is. So we're going to put the foliage straight over the top there, but before we do that, just because I've been holding this as I've been twiddling the card around, I'm going to use some more anti-static just to make sure we don't get any powder sticking where we don't want it to. And dust all of that off. Now on the original card I did the greens and then I came back splattered with water and tried to heat emboss some copper on there as well, but I don't know why, but I think maybe because this has got so much glitter in, it wasn't really holding and it was sort of going all over the place. So instead of doing that this time, we're going to just splatter with some metallic gilding polish instead. But for this layer we want to get our foliage stamp. And for the powders on this, I'm using two sparkly ones. I'm using Ocean Sparkle, which is a gorgeous like tealy aqua sort of colour, and then I'm going to use Glimmering Green, which is a beautiful like forest green or emerald green kind of colour with glitter in as well. And again, we're going to keep the mixture that's left over too. So I'm just going to ink up. It doesn't actually matter if we get any ink in the background because we're not going to press it that hard that the background ink would transfer. So we're just going to get a good even coverage. And then I just got a little bit of a die cut on there. Then we can stamp this. I think I'm going to turn it sideways to stamp. You can get sort of better pressure if you do it sideways, and you can kind of eyeball where you want this to go. Do you want it to overlap a little bit more in one direction or the other direction? Because it kind of depends how, like if you centralise your poinsettias on there as you stamped them as well. So we can just press this down nicely to get a good transfer of the ink. And then we can do exactly the same thing using the two different colours. So this time, well, I suppose on the other one you could actually see a good differentiation between the two of them. So I'm going to go more puddles again rather than speckly. So we should get gorgeous coverage with this beautiful aqua and then the deeper emerald green as well. Okay. Then, because we layered these stamps, we are going to get some pieces where the embossing powder from the green embossing powder is actually going to be over the top of the red poinsettias. You can see it kind of going over the top here. I actually really liked the way that that looked, and I did actually try brushing it off with a dry paintbrush the last time, but I did actually prefer it going over the top of the poinsettias. But if you didn't want it to, all you have to do, I am going to put it back on there because I like it, but all you have to do is where you see them overlapping, get a dry paintbrush and brush off the powder where they're overlapping, and then you can heat emboss it, and then it will look like the foliage is disappearing behind the poinsettias. But I do actually really like the look of them overlapping, so I am going to leave that on there. And we're going to do this a few times just to get the powder all over the place. We're sort of missing that branch down there. And we're missing a bit of that branch and over there as well. Maybe a little bit down there too. Okay, so there we've got all of our turquoisey greeny coloured powders on there, so I'm going to heat set that now. Okay, so there we've got our background heat set, and actually before we move on to showing you how to stamp those with distress inks, I actually want to use up the leftovers. So I'm going to get another piece of card and I'm going to show you how you can use up the leftover mix of embossing powder as well, just because I might as well just show you whilst we're here. Okay, so there is our one using the leftover powders. So we've got being more intentional and putting them in different positions, or using a complete mixture of the colours all together. It just gives a little bit of a different result, and you know, it gives a little bit of a variation. And if you were going to be batch making this and you did like a few of these, you could probably get another like 2 or 3 of these just from using your leftovers, because we've still got a little bit of leftover here. Or if you have this leftover left, and you've been watching some of my other advent videos, not sure if it's been out yet or if it's coming up, but I've also been doing some other experiments with embossing powders where you're sort of melting them down onto grey board shapes. So this kind of little mix would work really nicely for those kind of applications as well. If you didn't quite get to use up all of the rest that you've got left, you could use them for a different application as well. So I've got to decide what distress ink colours we want to use to show you how to stamp with your distress inks with these foam stamps that you can create. So if we go with the same sort of colours as the embossing powders, we can kind of maybe go with picked raspberry, abandoned coral and candied apple. And then for the foliage, ones that work really nicely in those kind of colours, we could maybe go cracked pistachio and pine needles perhaps as our colours, and we can see what kind of results we get with that. And because distress inks are water reactive, we can also spray this with water as well if we want to. So I'm going to put a piece of scrap paper down just because that stamp is just slightly bigger than my cardstock and I don't want to have to keep clearing up ink whilst we're working. And I'm going to move those jars of embossing powder so they're not making a shadow. So let's get our Poinsettia foam stamp. And actually a good thing about the foam is it does clean off really nicely as well. So if you did want to then go back to doing heat embossing, it should clean off nicely, especially with distress inks because they are water based. So you can easily clean this off nicely. So let's just get some good patches of picked raspberry. One sort of big patch on each of the poinsettias. Then we can go in with a little bit of abandoned coral. Hit some more of those like edge areas. I know that my candied apple one is really juicy, so I'm probably not going to add too much of the candied apple onto here in case it goes a little bit blobby. Okay. And then a little bit of candied apple because it's a really juicy ink pad. I'm not sure why it's so juicy, but it's always been really juicy, this one. So we'll go a little bit of candied apple on each of the poinsettias as well. Okay, then we're just going to stamp this onto our cardstock. So we can just place that into position and stamp like a normal background stamp. And we should get beautiful poinsettias. So really, really gorgeous. And actually, whilst we're doing this, I'm going to show you different techniques. So that is going to be just stamping with your distress inks. We're going to end up with so many cards at the end of this video, but again, it's good for kind of batch making. Then we're going to do another one, exactly the same, but we're going to spray it afterwards. So inking up with picked raspberry again, then a little bit of abandoned coral. I really like these kind of colours together, adding in that little bit of pink to a poinsettia. It gives it slightly more of a modern kind of feel, I think. And then tiny little bit of the candied apple as well, in any of those areas that I've missed. And it doesn't matter if you do the same colours in the same place or not, because we're making a completely different card. So then, this version is taking our cardstock and stamping. Then we're going to leave that to one side because I think it's going to be easier if we add the foliage first and then spray it with water. But to get a third example out as well, we're going to spray this with water. So I'm going to do it I'll risk doing it over my desk just so you can see, but I just do a couple of sprays of water just to sort of activate those inks again. Then if we get our piece of card, flip it over, and we should get a beautiful watercolour-y effect this time. And then because you've added that water, you can then also just wipe off your stamp then if you want to as well. And look at that beautiful effect that you get. I love this kind of look. So that is stamping and then using the leftover ink plus water to create our background. Then we need to add our foliage to our cards. So the first two we're going to do exactly the same as each other until we spray one of them with water. So we're going to go with cracked pistachio, which my cracked pistachio is quite juicy because I did re-ink it relatively recently because I was ink blending with it. So I'm just going to go over most of the areas with the cracked pistachio, because we can then just use more of like the corner of the pine needles just to add a little bit of darkness into there rather than overpowering it too much. So it's a little bit fiddier with the foliage because it's such sort of fine little areas, but it is still doable. And if you have any of those either like distress markers from years ago or any like water-based markers, like even the Letraset aqua markers from years ago, or those Winsor & Newton pigment ink pens, I can't remember the proper name of them, but any like water-based pen that has quite a chunky nib to it, or even a glitter marker actually, I didn't even think about that before, but a glitter marker, you could definitely, oh, let's do that on the final one, we'll do it with glitter markers, but yeah, you could definitely ink them up with glitter markers as well. So then we can place this, and that's the wrong way around, we can place this over the top and stamp our background, our foliage in our background. And there we go, we've got our beautiful foliage over the top. Then we're going to repeat that process again for this one with exactly the same ink. So we'll do cracked pistachio all over first. And then we'll add a tiny little bit of the pine needles in again. These are slightly more like aqua-y or on the bluier side of green, so they work really nicely with when you add a little bit of pinky tones in. It kind of gives that nice little offset of just using normal sort of green and red for Christmas. Going with a slightly bluer green and pinkier reds looks really nice. So, and that's the wrong way up again. Okay, so we can stamp this foliage down, and then to give this one a different look, we're going to spray this one with water. Okay, so that is that one done. Then we're going to spray this with some water to give it a watercolour-y effect. You can go as heavy or as light as you want, but I think it looks fantastic when you do this kind of effect because it just all like bleeds out really nicely. So that's that version, but then we can also do another version, which this time instead of just using this ink that's on here, let's get a glitter marker. This might make it a slightly darker green colour because I don't think there is like a minty kind of green in the glitter markers. I didn't have one of these ready, so I'm hunting for the right colour. Oh no, we have this colour actually, Peppermint Cream. This would work nicely. So Peppermint Cream glitter marker. Just get something to kind of make sure it's nice and juicy. Okay, that is pretty good. So we can colour our foam stamps with our Nuvo glitter markers. It doesn't have to be all over because, you know, last time we sprayed this and we managed to get some colour off that was still there even though we'd already stamped it once. So we're just sort of adding some glittery sparkle to this, but we're also going to utilise the colour that's still on there from the previous stamping as well. And you can see I'm kind of like holding the pen on the side to get a larger surface area of the nib as well. So there we go, we've got a little bit of glitter marker on there. Then we want to spray this with a couple of spritzes of water to activate those distress inks that were left on there. Then we can bring this back in, and I need to check I'm going to do this the right way up. I think it needs to go this way round, I think. And then we can flip this over and press this into position, and this time we'll get a beautiful softer watercolory effect, but we'll also get that beautiful glitter that's in there as well. So look at the sparkle from the glitter markers as well. It gives a really like soft, subtle kind of shimmer on there, and it will pop out more as it dries as well. So I'm going to clean these up and let these dry, and then I'll come back and we'll add some copper splatter to them as well. Okay, so there was me thinking we'll probably only make like one card in this video, but we've got 3 versions just with distress inks using our foam stamp. So that is just distress inks. This is distress inks and spraying with water. Then this is spraying the leftovers with water on our stamp and stamping, and then also adding the Nuvo glitter marker in on the foliage as well. Then we've also got the heat emboss background deliberately placing colours. And then we've also got the heat emboss background where we've actually used our mixture that was left over. And because this one has gone so blobby, I have got another idea for this one as well. But first of all, we need to do our copper splatters and leave it to dry, and then I'll come back and show you how I'm going to finish off this card. I was just going to finish off the same sort of one that I had done here, but actually I think I want to finish off this card to show you how to do that as well. So we're going to lay all 5 of these out, move anything out of the way that we don't want to get splatter onto, and have all 5 backgrounds out on our desk. Then I'm bringing in some copper shine gilding polish, or you could use a Nuvo mousse as well if you want to. I just knew this copper would go really nicely with that coppery embossing powder. Scoop a little bit out onto your mat and spray it with some water. Just a couple of sprays of water to mix it into kind of like a watercolory sort of consistency. Might need a little bit more water than that. It's a little bit on the thicker side for a consistency. We'll get, if you leave it slightly thicker, you'll get more like blobby globules rather than fine little splatter. And it also depends what size paintbrush you use as well to what size splatter you're going to get. But for my splatter, I love to use the Arteza fine detail paintbrushes, and I'm still using the same one. You can tell by its bristles how sort of stained it is, but it's still in a pretty good point. And this is like at least 3, possibly 4 years old, and I've been using it non-stop for all sorts of different mediums, and it cleans up so nicely. So we're literally just going to tap our brush into the puddle and then tap it across our backgrounds. And you can be deliberate with your splatter, or you can just do it all over, dependent on what kind of style you like. You don't have to do any splatter at all. On this one, you could do more like faux bleaching sort of splatter if you wanted to, because the colour has bled so much. You might be able to actually pick up some of that colour rather than adding a coloured splatter to it. And you can add this splatter over the top of the heat embossed ones as well. It looks fantastic. That's what I did on my original one. I had also, as I said earlier, splattered with water and tried to use embossing powder. But I think because it was a sparkly embossing powder, it just didn't want to stay on the water long enough for me to be able to heat set it. So you can definitely give that a go if you want to. But I didn't have as good a result as just using a gilding polish as my splatter. I think I preferred the gilding polish splatter. So, one more card to splatter. And if you want to as well, you could do your sentiment to match with your gilding polish. But my sentiment that I've prepared and that I did on the original card, I have heat embossed it with the shiny copper embossing powder that we used in the embossing powder background. So you can do whatever you like really for your sentiment, but that is how I prepared my little sentiments there. So I'm going to leave these to dry, and then I'm going to come back and show you my idea for finishing off this card that's gone a little bit blobby. Okay, I'm just popping back in really quickly because I just thought you could watercolour them in as well. So this is the one where we used up the leftover embossing powder from the little bags. We had our little mixtures. I just watercoloured it with the same 3 distress inks we were using, the Picked Raspberry, Abandoned Coral and Candied Apple, and then I just brought in some of the Peppermint Cream Nuvo glitter marker and watered it down and splattered it in the background as well. So you can also do that to them too. So I've got a couple of ideas of how to complete this one. All of the splatters on all of them are dry now, and I was thinking I could do this one landscape because the actual sentiment from Sue Wilson, the Christmas greetings, is designed to go landscape, but the 2 tiny little scripty words are actually separate. So you can do it landscape, or you can snip into the bubble at this little join here and create 2 pieces, one for each word, depending on whether you want to do them stacked on top of each other or if you want to do them in a row, like across a card horizontally. But I was thinking, because these have gone a bit blobby, you could either, these ones, I just cut the poinsettias out of pink cardstock, then use some more of our leftover, plus a little bit of extra pink, so I've now made more leftover. But I used a little bit of extra pink embossing powder on them as well. They won't line up perfectly because when you're making your stamps, you're actually using them the opposite way round, so it's the mirror image of them. So if I put that down that way, with the back of the die cut, it would fit perfectly. So actually, because we heat embossed them, you could have used the back of the die cut because you wouldn't be able to tell that it was the back. So you definitely could do them to directly line up if you wanted to. But I quite like the sort of slightly offsetness of them. And I've just done 3 to kind of do the 3 main focal ones. So you could do that and either put your sentiment portrait and have it as a portrait card, or do it as the landscape design. Or if you didn't want to add more colour to it, because the colour is like bled out here nicely, you could add some white poinsettias, and I've just cut a couple of the smaller ones and one of the larger ones, and you could kind of position them wherever you felt like you wanted it to go, or you can just leave it as it is. I just thought I'd give you a couple of extra ideas. You could also bring in like the more watercolory one and add some of these on top of there as well, or even the white ones back on top of it, and then put your sentiment on too. So tons of different ideas of layouts, but this was the original one, and I've just stacked up the Christmas greeting sentiment, which I heat embossed with that copper powder, and then I've used some little kind of like bronzy coloured gems, just 3 in the centre of each of the poinsettias. So I really didn't think we were going to make this many cards in this video. I thought I was literally just going to recreate this one for you, but now I've given you even more ideas. And I think I might come back and use these on the jelly plate at some point as well throughout the Advent series. So hopefully you got a little bit of inspiration from this video. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial, and if you do want me to walk you through like exactly how to cut your funky foam, how to poke out the pieces, how to stick it to the acetate and all that, making your layered kind of stamp, let me know, and that can be a tutorial in the future, because I do actually have some leaf dies that I would quite like to do that with. So yeah, do let me know if you want to see that in the future. It probably won't be in Advent, but further down the line I can do that. But yeah, hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again in the next one. Bye!